But I believe Jesus, through his relationship with Peter, teaches us so much. So we're going to fast forward a little bit to John 21. So we've been reading in Luke 5. John 21 is a different story with Peter, but it's very, very similar in context. Jesus had just died on the cross. That's where we're at. And so ministry seemed to be at a standstill for Peter. And it says in John 21 that Peter went back fishing. Now, a lot of people preach about this, and they say this is a bad thing, as if this is a bad thing. And I've even preached about it as if this was a bad thing, that Peter just went back fishing. But when I read it with the context of this message and just with the context of the word, I don't know how much of that was actually a bad thing. I think Peter just went back fishing because that's what Peter did. I think Peter just went back fishing because he wasn't doing ministry anymore. Jesus was gone, and what he knew before then was to be a fisherman, so I think he just went back fishing because he loved to fish. When Jesus was no longer there, and it seemed like ministry was over, why would Peter not fish? I think this is how many of us separate our lives with Jesus as well. On Tuesday nights, we're at Breakaway, and we do ministry there because that's where Jesus is. On Sunday morning, we go to church, and we're a part of ministry because that's where Jesus is. At my Bible study, that's where I do ministry because that's where Jesus is. But then on Monday morning, when I go back to my finance class, what is that supposed to look like? My finance class. I just go back because that's what I do. I go to finance class. Or maybe I go back to my sorority house. I go back home for the holidays. I go back to the football games on Saturdays. I go back to the tailgates. I go back to the date parties. I go back to the house and hang out with my friends. It's not a bad thing that you go back to these things. These are just your normal life things. None of these things are bad. But I think it is bad when you see those as a separate thing than your life with Jesus. I think it's bad when you don't see how Jesus can fit into those type of things. When we do ministry in places that Jesus naturally has talked about and forget to do ministry in our everyday life, I think that's when we see the suffering of the gospel getting spread. And I think we have to know that that's happening because there's like 10,000 people here, and I just wonder, do we feel this when we're on campus? How do we get this there? I want to talk to y'all about that. How do we merge the two? Well, looking back, I think there was a reason that Jesus got onto Peter's boat that day when the crowd was all around. I don't think it was a coincidence, and I don't just think it was because there was a large crowd. I think that Jesus got on the boat that day to show Peter that you can preach from the boat. I think he got on the boat that day to say right where you're at, you can stand up and you can talk about the word of God, and it can have impact even on the boat. I believe he told him that day that you can fish for men to show him that from now on, your purpose is not limited to boat and water. Your purpose is actually able to be lived out no matter where you are. So I want you to hear that today, that right here, right now, with what you're gifting in, is what you need to teach people about Jesus. It's not waiting for you after you graduate. It's not waiting for you when you get married. It's not waiting for you when God finally answers you on all the big questions that you have. It's right here and it's right now. In John 21, Jesus met Peter and the disciples at the sea where they were fishing. They didn't, of course, recognize Jesus because Jesus had just died on the cross and Jesus looked different. But he called out to them and he said, "Children, are you catching any fish?" And they responded, "No." And something about that I just love. Like they were just, no, just the reality. I'm not catching any fish. And I mean, I'm sure he actually meant, are you catching physical fish? But maybe it's like we can take it tonight too as, are you catching men right now? What are you doing? Are you catching fish? No, I'm not. I'm just fishing. And we're catching nothing. He said, well, cast your net on the other side.